We're back. After 3 weeks of hiatus, FilmTracks is back. I'm flying solo today, but today is an awesome day because we're going to talk about very cool film music news and 2 science fiction films that are indie films that are kind of changing the landscape of film scoring, so don't go anywhere.
Hosting and bandwidth for Trigla is provided by Media Temple.
Welcome to FilmTracks. My name is Andy, and I work here at Trigger Street. And if you are joining us for the first time, this podcast is about the marriage between sound and image and why soundtrack scores and soundtracks in general are so important to the images that you experience on screen and the emotional connection you have to it. So usually Jessie, my partner, would be here, but she is visiting her family for Passover, so she won't be joining us. But I have a really cool show in store for you guys. And the first thing I want to say is that over the weekend, I revisited an old film that I hadn't seen since I was like 8 or 9, and it was Beetlejuice. I saw this with Tanya, my wife, and it's weird because I feel like Tim Burton is kind of like a guy that is kind of in love with Tim Burton now. Like all of his films are kind of like over Tim Burton-y, and every time I go back to an old Tim Burton film, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the guy that we all fell in love with, and Beetlejuice is definitely one of those films. And surprisingly, the soundtrack, which is done, of course, by Danny Elfman, who used to be the lead singer of Oingo Boingo, the soundtrack is amazing, and it's like quintessentially Elfman, and it really defines the Elfman-Burton relationships at the very beginning. But it has 2 songs that are intermixed between the entire film. And one of them is the Banana Boat song. And when I saw this, it made me recognize why I loved it back when I was like 8 or 9 years old, and why I like rushed out to go get the tape from whatever tape store that I could that I could go to buy the soundtrack. And it was because of this moment in the actual movie. So just to start out, I think it'd be fun to watch a really cool clip, a really good movie moment that's awesome. So let's check it out.
It's cute, Delia.
Daylight come and me want go home.
Otho, are you doing
Work
this?
all night and a drink a rum. Daylight come and me want go home. Stack banana till the morning come. Daylight come and me want go home. Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana. Daylight come and me want go home. Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana. Daylight come and me want go home. Live 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot bunch. Daylight come and me want go home. 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot bunch. Daylight come and me want go home. Day is a day, oh. Daylight come and me want go home. Day is a day, is a day, is a day. Daylight come and me want go home. A beautiful bunch, a ripe banana. Daylight come and me want go home. Hide the deadly black tarantula. Daylight come and me want go home. Live 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot, 1.
So I ended up seeing this cue, and I was like, holy crap, no wonder I loved it so much as a kid. But it's just one of those instances where the entire film is scored, and there's only 2 songs, one at this moment in the film, and at the end when Winona Ryder kind of floats up above the stairs. And I can't remember which song that was, but it like those 2 stand out, and they're absolutely incredible. So if you actually haven't seen the movie, which I hope that you have, but if you haven't seen the movie, definitely check it out. It's an absolute classic, and I actually don't know anybody that hasn't seen Beetlejuice, but I do know people that haven't seen Star Wars, so maybe Beetlejuice is an exception. Chris, have you seen Beetlejuice? Please tell me yes.
Now I kind of wish I haven't, so I could disappoint you. But yeah, of course I have.
Of course,
Yeah,
okay.
Let's be real.
So anyway, I just wanted to start out with that clip because it like kind of brought me back to why soundtracks are so cool and why you identify them for some reason when you're young or even when you're old. Like there are certain moments that just kind of like speak to you, and that definitely was one of them when I was growing up. So moving on, this show is going to be kind of like different because I don't have a co-host, but at the same time, there's kind of so much like movie music news that has been going on over the past kind of like going on all the time. And I kind of wanted to go through that with you. One of the things that's really, really cool is, of course, Ridley Scott's Prometheus. And I am totally excited about this movie. Blade Runner is like my #1 movie, like favorite movie of all time. I think it's like actually the most perfect movie ever made. And I hope that Ridley goes back to that aesthetic for Prometheus. And I know that he will. And it seems like everybody's saying, or the buzz is that he is. One thing, however, I know that all of you film score peers out there are wondering is whether or not he's going to pay a very nice tribute to Jerry Goldsmith, who did the first Alien film. Now, Jerry Goldsmith, and we've talked about this on FilmTracks, or maybe on Palace's Musiccast when I did a film score segment on her show. But Jerry Goldsmith is kind of like, to me, one of the godfathers of film score, like film scoring in general. He kind of like on par with Williams, on par with even Alfred Newman. I mean, kind of like the golden age era of film score composing. And it's actually, like, his score to Alien is incredible, and actually it plays a prominent character throughout the first film and why it's so intense and suspenseful. And most people, it's one of those films where you actually don't notice the score so much. It's kind of subconscious, but you definitely, if you watch it again and think about the music, you'll definitely understand why Jerry Goldsmith was an absolute genius. But why most people don't recognize him as a composer as famous as Williams. Think about Chinatown, for example, as well. I mean, Chinatown with Jack Nicholson is one of the best Polanski movies of all time. Jerry Goldsmith's score, absolutely fantastic album if you have the chance to listen to it. So one of the things that happened recently was Ridley Scott got interviewed. He got interviewed and was specifically asked about the soundtrack score and whether or not he would pay tribute to Jerry because it would be an insult if he didn't. And he said this. He says, Jerry Goldsmith's score was one of the major scores of the last 30 and 40 years. He was who he was. I did 2 films with Jerry. I think the score is always incredibly important for me because I tend to shoot with the score in mind. So that's really good. He says, I've never shot a film without a score in mind, but I'm sure I will one day. The score is an evolution. It's a script in itself, so I pay a lot of attention to that. Mark Streitenfeld, who's now doing the score to Prometheus, he's done a very nice score for us. This is the 5th score that he's done for me. It's very important, again. So I say that his score is sometimes as important as the visuals. So, as you just heard, Mark Streitenfeld is doing the score for Prometheus. And, Ridley Scott seems to be going to Streitenfeld a lot as his go-to guy for a number of his films. But it's good hearing that, Ridley kind of shoots and knows what the music's going to be while he's, there directing the actors. So I'm incredibly excited, and I hope that that Prometheus is going to be as awesome as we all expect it to be. And somebody in the chat room just said Robin Hood as well. Yeah, he did Robin Hood, and I think he did A Good Year, and he's done, I think he was on Gladiator as the music supervisor. It's interesting because he's definitely a part of the Zimmer School of training, which is kind of like the Media Ventures kind of synth, big Media Ventures corporate Zimmer-esque music route going into film scoring. But it'll be interesting to see what Prometheus is like, because Alien was a very minimalist score but had a very cinematic quality, and to live up to that, to live up to Jerry Goldsmith's music is kind of, it's a big task to take. So I definitely hope that it's going to be awesome. We'll definitely talk about it when it comes out for sure. So moving on to something interesting, and this is kind of a stepping stone to the next subject, which is the Universal Pictures 100th anniversary logo. So Universal turned 100 this year, and when I worked there, when I worked there last year, the buzz was that everybody was really, really interested to see what they would do for their, centennial. It was a big thing in the corporate culture over there, and I had heard from the film music department that they were working on something really cool to put in front of their movies. And turns out Brian Tyler did the music for their new logo. I don't know if anybody has been to the movies recently and seen a Universal film and seen the new Centennial logo, but the Centennial logo was also for Universal, and actually the music for the logo was composed by Jerry Goldsmith. And Brian Tyler had to live up to, or try to figure out a way to creatively live up to Jerry's original theme. And there was a really interesting clip on YouTube about where he talks about the Centennial, or making of the new Centennial logo for Universal Pictures. And somebody in chat actually said the gray as well for Mark Schreidenfeld. You're absolutely right. The gray, which we talked about a few weeks ago on FilmTracks, I think, was an absolutely incredible score, very minimalist score. So, I think that Streitenfeld definitely has chops to be able to take Prometheus in a new direction, or in a direction that's appropriate for the subject. Now let's check out this clip about Brian Tyler, and definitely let's check it out because it's pretty awesome.
The Universal logo has been around for so long, and it's so iconic. My task was to take on this great theme and do something new with it. We want to utilize the classic melody that we all know and bring it into the 21st century, but still really be respectful of what Jerry Goldsmith had originally written.
Okay, let's roll it.
I want it to be a celebration of all the great movies Universal's done over the years. Connecting the past with the present, the main line that we've always heard in the horns, that's still there. But you have the movement of the music underneath it. I had a few sneak peeks at the visuals that were being worked on. The globe coming in and the letters spinning around and seeing the cityscapes. That was a huge influence for me, to add choir. There's also kind of a sparkly, shimmery type of thing throughout the piece that I've done with violins. And it gives it kind of the magic feel. And at the end of the piece, I have a whole drum cadence.
The thing that I think people really latch onto is the bass drum there.
I use drums from around the world, like djembes and African drums. And I thought that was kind of a nice way to bring that idea of Universal Pictures being global.
Very nice. Give me chills.
It's pretty incredible that every time I now see a film by Universal, I'll hear the logo music that I'd conducted. It cues you in to say, okay, put away the phone, stop eating your popcorn for a split second, and pay attention. It's a huge honor.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but that makes me feel like I want to see a movie like right now. I don't know. There's something about the main title credit, like the credit sequence of an actual studio, that I actually love. And to be honest, the credit sequences of studios, like the studio sequence, is actually really cool. Like a lot of even indie production companies are making really like creative intros. But Universal definitely has like a close place in my heart, and I think it's awesome that Brian Tyler got the nod to be able to create something like this, considering how young he is, and that he also has to live up to Jerry Goldsmith. And somebody in chat, I believe, was talking about how Brian Tyler is actually a really kind of up-and-coming composer. He has a lot of chops, and he's very well known for doing aggressive and bombastic scores. And that's true. And, you know, to be honest, when I first heard about Brian Tyler doing this when I was at Universal, I was like, why are they picking Brian Tyler? Like, why don't they pick somebody that's a little bit, you know, more well-versed in the old world of film composing, like Goldsmith or like Williams? And then I saw Fast Five, and to be honest, Fast Five, which was composed by Brian Tyler, took me completely by surprise for one reason, and actually one shot or one sequence, one scene of the film. The entire score is mostly, you know, you can't really think about it in any way, shape, or form. It's just there to aid the action of the film. But there was one moment at the beginning of the story that kind of took me completely by surprise. So let's check it out, and hopefully I'll do this right. And this is why I think Brian Tyler is definitely a composer that we should look for. All right, here we go. Simple clip, you know, not really. I mean, if on the CD, it literally lasts a minute and a half, and I bought the CD because the entire album in my mind is worth that one cue, and that's kind of like a lot of film scores. I always used to debate this with other people who are really into movie music, is that, you know, you kind of have to wonder whether or not, you know, a composer is pushing themselves over a certain cue, like if they're creatively pushing themselves to do something they haven't done before. And I think after listening to Tyler's music, this to me was that cue. I was like, huh, he's doing something that I've never heard him do before. He's somebody that may be pushing out of that, you know, out of that realm of like just remaking every other theme as it needs to be remade, or making that action cue sound big, you know. And I think it's also a really good sign for a film when you have sound effects dimmed out and you just have the music. It really sets the tone. And I think that for a big action movie like Fast Five, this is the first time I ever had seen that in all of the Fast films, actually. And actually, it's a pretty good movie. If you haven't seen the film, and I know, Chris, you haven't seen the movie, you should really check it out. It's
Call me out on that one?
It's a really...
Jeez. Gotta call me out.
Yeah, Chris hasn't seen the movie, but a lot of people haven't seen it because it is a franchise and it is something that's kind of been rebooted a million times over. But the movie music and the actual action and story of the film is pretty decent, and it has The Rock in it, and who doesn't want to see him, right? So anyway, so I think, so yeah, Fast Five, Brian Tyler, but also the Universal Pictures anniversary logo is awesome. Check it out if you're in theaters. But one thing that's actually really cool, and I wanted to announce this at the end of the show, but I have to do it now, is that if you watch this clip, and all these clips, by the way, are on our website, on our blog, and later, once the show is done, there'll be a post about it on the FilmTracks page. So you can rewatch these and download clips and buy the albums on iTunes and whatnot. But
What's our blog, Andy?
it's trig.la, everybody. Sorry, thanks, Chris. Go to trig.la and you'll find everything. But one of the guys that's actually in that clip of the Universal logo making of is a guy named Mike Knobloch, and he's the president of the film music. He's president of film music, period, at Universal Pictures. And he's a really awesome guy. He came from Fox a few years ago to work at Universal. And we have him on the show in a couple weeks, which is a huge honor and is going to be an amazing show. So definitely come and tune in for that, because we'll ask him about this, and it'll be great to have somebody who is in charge of movie music at a studio to talk a little bit about what it is that they do and how they kind of have oversight into what composers need to do what movie and how they negotiate the creative element with the business side. And I think for all of us, working in the business or not, or purely fans, that's a really interesting part of the process that very few of us know about. So we'll definitely have him in the show in a couple weeks, so stay tuned for that. All right, moving on to another movie called The Raid: Redemption. And I know, Chris, have you seen this movie?
I have not, but I really want to see it.
Me too. I have not seen this movie, and it's gotten a lot of buzz around town, especially here in LA. I know it was at South by Southwest, which I'm not sure, and correct me if I'm wrong in chat or whatever if I'm wrong about this, but where it premiered. But apparently it's supposed to be the most amazing action film like ever. I mean, it's nonstop action, and they did it for very little money. And again, it's one of these like surprising indie films that makes it big and is able to surprise audiences, in theaters with either its action or its fighting. But one of the things that's cool about it is the score. And the score is done by this guy named Joe Trapanese. He comes from a band. He's a DJ, electronica artist, who's now been commissioned to do the Tron Uprising film, which is, I guess, the next installment of the Tron prequel. I think they're coming out with a new one. But anyway, it's a really awesome soundtrack, and I have actually listened to the soundtrack before I've even seen the movie, and it just makes me want to see the film because it's absolutely awesome. So I have a little clip here from The Raid: Redemption, not from the actual movie, but I think it's the soundtrack cut to specific scenes from either the trailer or the film. Check it out, and I think you'll appreciate it. TheRaidScore.com is where you could get it, and I think, yes, that clip is not on the actual soundtrack, but it's very cool to see these kind of electronica remix artists, kind of like Daft Punk almost, going into film scoring. And Jesse and I have talked about this on our show before, how there's this like cross-pollination now with electronica going into film score music. And when I was in college back in like 98 to 2002, the big thing that was happening at that time in film score music was indie artists, I guess, doing doing soundtrack scores. Like post-rock was a big explosion in like the turn of the millennium, and everybody was like, oh, it's just a matter of time before they end up getting put into a soundtrack score. And Friday Night Lights was kind of a good example of that. So this is definitely a movie that we should look out for. And an artist, John Trapanese, who's going to be probably an up-and-coming guy, especially after he does Tron. Looks like he's a one-man band, probably does a lot of sampling and stuff like that. But it's awesome, and I think it's awesome that movies are gravitating towards this, because they're realizing that with technology with the technology that's available to people, composers can make really big sounds with absolutely nothing, with just a few samples and a computer. So definitely look out for it. All right, kind of switching gears here a little bit. I think film scoring in general and film music is kind of interesting to a lot of people, primarily because we enjoy it as a standalone album. We can listen to Star Wars, or we can listen to a soundtrack by Thomas Newman or Deb Lurie or Brian Tyler and revisit the film emotionally in ourselves and kind of like in our mind get that same nostalgia or dopamine release that we got in the theater. But very little is known about how composers actually do it. Like, where do they come from, and who are these people, and are they trained through school? And then how do they find projects to work on and rise up and become a Brian Tyler or become a John Williams or a Mancini, and do stuff like that? Like, I mean, most of these guys end up go into film scoring through being in a band. Like Clint Mansell, drummer for Red Hot Chili Peppers, James Newton Howard, he toured with Elton John, Danny Elfman was with Oingo Boingo. So these guys seem to have kind of a common thread of being in music already, but there are a variety of composers who are just composers. They are trained classical musicians, trained musicians in some form or fashion, and they all have their own way of either composing or seeing images on screen and transcribing ideas, sending that to the director, and the director says yes or no, and then they compose from that. So most people, I think, outside of the business don't really understand that. And I found on Kickstarter that there's actually a documentary that is trying to raise money to make a documentary about film composing. The guy is a composer himself, and he's interviewing a variety of composers throughout LA because he already has the in as a composer, and is documenting the entire journey of a composer from like start to stardom. And it's called Chasing Notes. And again, the link will be on Trigla in our section after the show's over, so you can check it out. But I want to show you the trailer. It's only a few minutes long, and it's actually pretty cool. And I think it's the first documentary kind of its kind. So let's check this out.
Whether people are aware of it or not, the score really sets the emotional tone for a piece.
Music can now make you see the wheels turn. It can say what words can't say.
It is very magical, and the first time you hear your music played by a live orchestra, it's kind of mind-blowing.
So if you made the scene work and people go, I didn't even know there was music there, but that was a great scene, you go, mission accomplished.
How can music best tell the story in this scene? What point of view is it going to take? How's it actually going to portray the emotions that we need in those scenes?
That's your job, is to serve the film. It could be anything that makes the scene work. As long as the scene works and is fun and is exciting or emotional or scary or whatever it's supposed to be, there are no rules. That's one of the great joys of film composing.
So if you're interested in finding more info about this, chasingnotes.com, Kickstarter, they've raised a ton of money already. I think they only have a few thousand left. And I know, Chris, you use Kickstarter a lot to look at projects, right? And Kickstarter is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I haven't had any projects on it, but I know a lot of friends who've used it, and a lot of people who have completely funded on it. So it's really cool.
And you were telling me that actually Florida State University is now allowing their students to use Kickstarter as a platform, right?
Yeah, this is the first year I think that they've allowed that. That's I went to film school at Florida State, and they just allowed thesis films to start making campaigns on Kickstarter. So the thesis class right now, they put a video up, and the video is actually really good. They just kind of like made a really fun thing for everybody to kind of watch to see, hey, we're asking for a little bit of money to distribute to everybody. It's a small class, so that way everybody gets like $1,000. I think they're asking for $15,000. But people are using it for everything. You know, it's like film schools can use it, but individuals are using it. Web series, everybody's using it. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's like crowdsourcing. It's like crowdsourcing creativity that I find really, really interesting. And I think that that this is definitely a new direction for stuff that's being made, at least stuff that we're seeing digitally or even theatrically. But definitely check it out. It's called ChasingNotes.com, documentary about film score composing. Send them a few bucks, you could get a credit. Kind of neat. And they apparently have interviews. The guy has interviews with like James Newton Howard, John Williams, like all the greats, and just wants enough money to actually get it like distributed and shown to people to educate them about the process of it. So that kind of wraps up my film music news overall. I know it's not much, but actually I did want to talk one more thing about how many of you on chat have heard the new James Horner score for Black Gold. So we actually haven't talked about James Horner at all on the show, but he's his own show. He's probably multiple shows because I actually wrote, to get into graduate school, I wrote a essay about him and his Spock and his Star Trek Search for Spock score. And apparently this new score that he released, and of course he did Titanic and he did Avatar and is kind of known for those, James Cameron type movies. But back when he was younger, his scores were like pretty amazing. He did Aliens, which is a mind-blowing score, and Bicentennial Man, bunch of other, Braveheart, bunch of other films, scores that are absolutely mind-blowing. But apparently his newest score to this movie called Black Gold has been getting crazy reviews. 10 out of 10. Everybody's saying that it's going back to his old ways. He's scoring, kind of like he was after he got out of USC. And I just want to know if you guys have listened to it, because I haven't had a chance to see the film, but I've heard really, really great things about it. So if you haven't seen the film or heard it, definitely check it out and report back. All right. So over the weekend, I actually, and I've been talking to Chris a lot about this, there is kind of like a resurgence of sci-fi in the indie world that I think is awesome. First of all, I love sci-fi. There are two types of sci-fi. Well, actually, there are many, many types of sci-fi. There's like the Star Trek sci-fi. There's like the Blade Runner sci-fi. And then there's this kind of like new sci-fi that are character stories, but using science fiction as kind of like a small piece of the narrative. It adds an aesthetic, or it adds kind of like a texture to the film that you wouldn't have otherwise. And one example of this is a movie called Another Earth, where this other Earth comes into Earth's orbit, and it's an exact copy of our Earth. So there technically would be a doppelganger of me on this other planet. And it's kind of built into the narrative, into this character story about a girl who loses everything at the beginning and dreams of this other self, other person of her who may have, had no regrets or may not gone down the same path that she did. So the whole film is about her search for that truth, for that person, or trying to make amends and get a trip up to that second planet, which is something that's kind of like a raffle thing. You have to write an essay to do it. And I think that if you haven't seen the film, definitely do. It's one of my top films of last year. Beautifully made film. And again, using science fiction as a way to tell a really good story. And over the weekend, I saw a interesting movie that had been around actually for a while called Monsters. It's a British film released a couple years back, actually. I think it was 2010. But it was made for $800,000 and, minimal crew. Guy shot on a I don't know if it was a Red or it was definitely an HD camera, and they took the editor with his MacBook Pro down, and he was editing as they went. Used no major actors, kind of did it as they went. Not necessarily mumblecore, but kind of. They kind of just walked into places and said, "Hey, can you just say these lines and can you do this?" And they were able to get scenes out of them that way. But I ended up seeing Monsters with Tanya, my wife Tanya, over the weekend, and again, it kind of struck me as a film that uses sci-fi to tell a interesting character story about two people trying to come together, kind of battling their own demons as they travel through this landscape that's infected by these alien creatures. And the kind of the whole story is that there's this part of Mexico that's quarantined. Of course, it has to be Mexico. I don't know why, but it's quarantined out of the world because of this infection that has kind of invaded its space. And as a result, these two people are trapped down in South Mexico, have to make it to the U.S. border. And so the story basically follows them. She has a fiancé, and he's just doing a favor for a friend of his or for a wealthy client. He's getting paid to do it. And they end up having this kind of unspoken connection throughout the film that doesn't really go into fruition until the end. Now, the score is done by a guy named John Hopkins, and I had never heard of him, and actually I never heard of him until I actually saw the film, or until I researched him for this show. And he's done a bunch of short films, but actually has done a feature film with Brian Eno called Bag of Bones. I think it's called Bag of Bones. Peter Jackson film. Saw it a while back. It kind of was in theaters for a little bit, but then kind of fell off the map. It was a small film, but definitely studied under the Eno aesthetic, and apparently Eno is one of his mentors. He was born in 78 and kind of saw Eno as the Grand Master and does a lot of electronica stuff on his own. But this is kind of his first major feature, and let me play a clip from it because I think it's definitely something that, again, you go from this science fiction ravaged world into these very interesting landscapes and interesting character studies that you normally wouldn't get with a Star Trek or a Star Wars. They don't really offer a chance for the characters to really breathe. It's very, very structured and very fast. But check this scene out and listen to the score. It's definitely something that's pretty interesting. So that could give you a very simple example of something that's very simple. And somebody in chat is actually talking about this, how simpler scores and very subtle music, either a guitar or a piano, could have some synth as an underlying overtone or undertone of the theme, is actually somewhat more moving or can be way more powerful than a full-blown orchestral score. And I completely agree with this, and I think that is definitely something that's headed that way. And I mean, one could argue that even A Dark Knight is kind of like that, and that's a pretty big film. But Zimmer's score there are parts that are very very subtle and very ambient. I mean, that could be James Newton Howard on his earlier films. It could be the James Newton Howard collaboration thing. But for the most part, I think this is definitely something that people are gravitating towards, at least directors for the most part. And actually, Deb Lurie, who we had on the show a few weeks ago, talked about this, and she's very, very good at this type of scoring as well, is like giving the film the ability to breathe musically. And so you get these moments, whether it be a look or whether it be just these people going on a boat, down a river, with the contrast of the desolation of the bombing that went on when the airstrikes were going on to like kill the aliens. So you've got this like landscape with these people, the boat, and it's just very simple and beautiful. And there's something that you just want to keep watching and experiencing. You don't need the orchestra to be able to do that. There's one element of the story. I don't want to give too much away because you definitely should see it, and I don't want to ruin the end, which is actually kind of the best part, of course. But there's this moment where the two characters, this guy and this girl who are trying to get past this quarantine zone, go into this city, and they have a very nice time. They have fun. They're getting tequila, and they're kind of like taking a break from the craziness that they've had to endure. And you go from this very cool kind of like salsa, Mexican flamenco music to this very ambient theme, and it's a very nice transition, and it's very cool. Something that reminded me a lot of Eno. If you ever listen to his Music for Airports album, it is something that he does extensively, so you can definitely hear it in this. Check this scene out.
The vibe just changed.
So again, very simple scene, nothing major, but it goes from just like this, kind of like happy guitar to this very like open emotional space where these guys are kind of experiencing all these people that have died based on the bomb raids to kill these animals. And you learn later that these animals are no different than us. They're just trying to do their part to survive and move forward as a species. So very interesting film. Definitely look for it. The score, which is actually you can purchase on iTunes for only $10, which is on our Trigla site in our post later. You can check out the score and buy it. It's actually a pretty decent score to listen to on its own if you like the Eno or even like Cliff Martinez sound. It reminds me a lot of the Solaris score by Martinez. Yeah, so Monsters, very, very cool movie. All right. Also saw another kind of movie, a little bit different, called The Hunter. It's an Australian film with Willem Dafoe. It actually has Sam Neill in it. And I don't know this, Chris, but is Sam Neill is Australian, right?
I have no idea.
You have no idea? All right. Maybe somebody in chat...
Yeah, no, I don't really pay attention to that kind of thing.
All right. I don't know if Sam Neill's Australian because he has an accent and it sounds very natural, but and I think he was in Until the End of the World, where he had an Australian accent. I'm not sure. But Australian film, it's absolutely awesome. And again, it's kind of marketed as this action movie, but it ends up being about this guy kind of connecting with the family in Australia while he's hunting this very rare species of a Tasmanian tiger for a biotech company. So the company is basically hiring him to find this rare animal to use for, whatever scientific thing that they need, whether it be like probably to make billions of dollars, but at the expense of this family's kind of safety. And what struck me about the film is, again, landscape shots are absolutely amazing, very wide shots, minimalist score, very non-James Newton Howard score for this. Like, if James Newton Howard was scoring this and you had like a very wide helicopter shot of a guy walking across a plane, there would be, the whole violin section, there would be French horns, and there would be a really beautiful theme. I mean, think, King Kong or Hidalgo, but not this. Very, very minimalist and very interesting. So let's check out a clip of this, and you'll see exactly why this kind of connects with monsters. Again, not very, it's just probably a few notes done with the synth, but I think really effective, really gets his isolation very much present in that shot. Could not be done with a thematic score by like Williams or even Goldsmith. I don't think he could pull that off. Or if he did, it would be a completely different film and completely different emotional response altogether. The film itself, or the score itself, is done by 3 guys, and I've never heard of these guys. Maybe you have. Andrew Lancaster, Michael Lira, and Matteo Zingales. Now, these guys are new to the film composing world. I think they're Australian. I'm not entirely sure, but they've done a bunch of shorts, bunch of TV in Australia, so they've got to be. This is kind of their first, at least the first time I've ever heard of them or heard one of their scores. But again, really happy that we're going into this very minimalist style of composing. And somebody in chat earlier actually said that Thomas Newman is one of the, kind of the industry standard for being the master at this. And I think you're absolutely correct. And it's one of the reasons why I like Deb Lurie's music so much, is because she knows exactly how to do it to give film music that breadth. And Thomas Newman has been able to do it for a long time. I mean, go watch a movie like The Player, which I think is a Robert Altman film. Watch the first beginning of that film, which is like a tracking shot that lasts like 10 minutes. Thomas Newman is able to score everybody in that tracking shot perfectly by giving them all each individual personalities without ever missing the emotional arc of the theme. And I'm not sure how he's able to do it. Apparently he's just experiments the hell out of everything. But it is my ambition, actually, to get him on this show at some point. There's got to be a way to get him on the show, although he's probably impossible to get. I should get John Williams on the show. That would be awesome, too. But I'm sure he's completely unavailable, or would cost probably $1 million to get. But anyway, The Hunter, definitely check it out. It's on iTunes. It was recently put on iTunes, I think, last week or a few weeks ago, and has been on my list of movies to watch. And there's one last thing I want to talk about with this film. And there's only one, I guess, VA track on the entire soundtrack. And it's a Bruce Springsteen song. And it relates to one of the characters because this guy who kind of, I told you, Willem Dafoe relates to connects to this family. Well, they've been kind of left behind by their father, these kids' father and this lady's husband, who went out in the outback looking for this animal and never came back. And one of the things that this guy did is listen to Bruce Springsteen, absolutely loved Bruce Springsteen. And one of the things that they did when they moved into the house out in the middle of the outback was put speakers up everywhere. And Willem Dafoe kind of knows that their father is dead, but doesn't really say anything to the family, and kind of like, I guess, out of feeling sorry for them or feeling sad about it, he ends up hooking everything up and puts on a generator. He fixes this generator that gives them electricity. And right after he fixes the generator, the Bruce Springsteen song kicks in, and it's this weird moment where the wife wakes up, who has never seen Willem Dafoe's character before, recognizes the music and thinks her husband is back, and sees the back of Willem Dafoe and thinks it's her husband. And it's this really intense moment set behind Bruce's music. And I think this could be considered counterscoring. I think it's a brilliant use of his music because it ties perfectly into the story. But check this scene out. I don't think it's giving too much away. I think this will just give you an idea of like when people make the right decisions for using music in a movie. Check this out.
Hey, little girl, is your daddy home? Did he go and leave you all alone? I got a bad desire. Oh, I'm on fire. Tell me now, baby, is it good to you? And can you do to me the things that I do? I can take you high. Like someone took a knife, baby, edgy and dull, and cut a 6-inch valley through the middle of my skull. At night I wake up with the sheets soaking wet and a freight train running through the middle of my head. Only you can cool my desire. Oh, I'm on fire.
Really awesome scene. I absolutely loved it. And again, you'll probably notice that throughout the show and future shows, I'll always be talking about scenes that kind of have their own moment. And this one, if you noticed in that clip, you have sound effects very clearly at the beginning. You hear, it sounds like you're hearing it through the actual record player, like you're a character in that house. But then there's the creative element, the movie magic element of being able to get into the music. It slowly fades into the actual song, so you hear it in like full stereo in the theater, and so you're immersed in the music. And I think that moment is something that it's like that moment is something that Jesse and I, and most people who love film score music, and I'm sure you all in chat can attest to this, is why we end up going back and listening for these key scenes and listening to these tunes over and over and over again, and eventually buying the record and following these composers. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please follow us on iTunes. And we had a great day on Trigla today because we were announced or featured on the main banner of the iTunes podcast store, on the iTunes store. So it's actually pretty awesome for us. Really excited about that. Check out trig.la, FilmTracks. Check out our other podcasts. We've got a great lineup of stuff. Subscribe, rate our stuff, and yeah, check out the albums when this show goes on. Check out all these links and YouTube links. They'll be on there for you. So yeah, stay tuned. Next week we've got a great guest. His name is Austin Wintory. He's the composer of a game called Journey. It's for PlayStation 3. And Gary Whitta, who was on the show previously to talk about the Book of Eli, he actually tweeted about this game and found Austin Wintory on Twitter to see if he could be on the show, and he's going to be here next week to talk about it. And apparently it is a very epic game. I really suggest that you go and check out the trailer, or at least clips from it online. It's a PS3 game called Journey, and we'll talk about the intricacies of game scoring and how that's different from feature film scoring. But it's not so different anymore. I feel like games are getting more cinematic by the day. So definitely stay tuned for that. And then the week after, we've got Mike Knobloch, the president of film music from Universal Pictures, to be on our show. So very exciting next couple weeks. Thank you guys for watching the show. Find us on iTunes and Trigla, and check us out. See you next week.